ستم کی ہو گئی یہ انتہا رسول کے بعد، ستم کی ہو گئی یہ انتہا رسول کے بعد، چلی ہے مانگنے حق فاطمہ رسول کے بعد، چلی ہے مانگنے حق فاطمہ رسول کے بعد، رسول زادی کھڑی کیوں رہیں سرے دربار، رسول زادی کھڑی کیوں رہیں سرے دربار، یہ کون تخت پہ بیٹھا رہا رسول کے بعد، ستم کی ہو گئی یہ انتہا رسول کے بعد، وہ جا کے شہر سے باہر پدر کو روتی رہیں، وہ جا کے شہر سے باہر پدر کو روتی رہیں، کسی نے گھر میں نہ رونے دیا رسول کے بعد، ستم کی ہو گئی یہ انتہا رسول کے بعد، وہ جرم کیا تھا کہ جس پر علی کو گلیوں میں، وہ جرم کیا تھا کہ جس پر علی کو گلیوں میں رسن سے باندھ کے کھینچا گیا رسول کے بعد، رسن سے باندھ کے کھینچا گیا رسول کے بعد، شکستہ ہو گیا کیسے بطول کا پہلو، شکستہ ہو گیا کیسے بطول کا پہلو، بتاؤ ظلم یہ کس نے کیا رسول کے بعد، بتاؤ ظلم یہ کس نے کیا رسول کے بعد، جو چہرے آئے تطہیر کی بنے تفسیر، جو چہرے آئے تطہیر کی بنے تفسیر، انہیں پھرایا گیا بے ردا رسول کے بعد، ستم کی ہو گئی یہ انتہا رسول کے بعد، درود پر محمد و آل محمد۔
If I can request the brothers to come closer to the front. There's space at the front here. Come closer towards the front for those who are coming in. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Come closer to the front, please. Come closer. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وأصحابه الغر الميامين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد، يقول الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الذين غلبوا على أمرهم لنتخذن عليهم مسجدا. The first of our salawat in honor of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alihi. The second in honor of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. The third with your loudest voices in honor of Imam Sahib al-Asr wal-Zaman. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One final request for the brothers to come closer to the front. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Come closer to the front. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. The story of the companions of the cave is one of the most fascinating stories in the Holy Quran, and a story which requires an in-depth examination, for it is a story which affects each and every one of our lives. A story with a historical base and a contemporary significance. Contemporary in the idea that there are a number of key lessons that may be learned from the story which affect our everyday discussions. Lessons which may be theological, or indeed ethical, or indeed spiritual, or indeed at the same time jurisprudential. As an example, a theological lesson may be the understanding of the group who believed in the oneness of God and the prophethood of Jesus, son of Mary. And the idea within the Holy Quran, we have a number of groups who were from the original Christians. The Christians who believed in only one God and believed that Jesus was the prophet of God. You find that the companions of the cave, alongside the companions in the story of Yasin and the companions in the story of Surah Al-Buruj, are seen as the original monotheistic Christians. And therefore there is a theological lesson learned from this story. Likewise, there is a spiritual lesson in the fact that the companions of the cave were a group of youths who had such strong faith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increased them in guidance. As the Quran states, إِنَّهُمْ فِتْيَةٌ آمَنُوا بِرَبِّهِمْ فَزِدْنَاهُمْ هُدًى. They were a group of youths who believed in their Lord, and we increased them in guidance. And therefore there is a spiritual lesson for all youths, that here are a group of youths who in the middle of the most turbulent period managed to remain loyal to the message of their Lord, and their Lord rewarded them. Likewise, there is a spiritual lesson as well as an ethical lesson. Ethical in which way? In the fact that after that many years of sleep, as soon as they woke up, they knew that they felt a state of hunger. And the first thing they said when they felt the state of hunger was, make sure you go out and find pure food for us to eat. Highlighting the ethical importance that the food that you eat in your life should always be the purest of food, and you should endeavor to research it. But there is a jurisprudential lesson to be learned from the story of Ashab al-Kahf, which I'd like to examine tonight. and that is the discussion concerning the erecting of a mosque over the grave of a holy personality. Because as we know, for many years, the followers of the school of Ahlul Bayt have been accused of being grave worshippers. And the idea that we've been accused of being amongst those who worship those who are buried in the graves. We are accused as being amongst those who are innovators, asking from the people of the graves rather than asking from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are accused of being those who come towards the grave and actually worship the one buried in the grave rather than the Lord who created them. And therefore you find leaflet after leaflet and pamphlet after pamphlet and lecture after lecture which attacks the school of Ahlul Bayt as being a school of grave worshippers. People who go towards the land of Karbala or the land of Najaf or the land of Kadhmi or the land of Samarra and worship those who are buried within the grave. And indeed you find that this particular area of controversy is one that requires an answer. For when you look within the Islamic world generally, you find that there seems to be a difference of opinion as to honoring personalities by building mosques above shrines on their graves. What do I mean? If you look across the Muslim world today, you'll find there are certain Muslim countries who revere their chosen personalities by building shrines over their graves. For example, in Egypt, you may find that Egypt is a country which follows the Shafi'i school of jurisprudence. We may be seen as Ja'faris, they are seen as Shafi'is. Yet you find within the Shafi'i school of jurisprudence, you find that they have clearly erected edifices over the graves of their holy personalities. And on top of that have built what? They have built mosques. Even one of the main jurisprudential works within the Islamic literature in Egypt is a book called Shifa al-Suqam fi Ziyarat Khayr al-Anam. Shifa al-Suqam fi Ziyarat Khayr al-Anam is a main textbook which explains the fact that there is nothing wrong with revering a holy personality by building a shrine on top of their grave and then by building a mosque on top of that shrine. That's why in Egypt, some of the greatest personalities of the religion of Islam are revered to have died in Egypt or at least lived in Egypt. As an example, you have a shrine for Sayyida Zainab in Egypt. If you go to Egypt today, you'll find that there's a shrine for Sayyida Zainab, because we know that there's a difference of opinion as to where Sayyida Zainab is buried. There are some who come forward and state that Sayyida Zainab is buried in Damascus, that after Karbala, Yazid ordered that she has to come towards that land in order that he's able to patrol the area. But then there's an opinion that the governor of Egypt, Maslama bin Mukhallad al-Ansari, asked that Sayyida Zainab comes towards the land of Egypt, that she comes there and lives there, and that she died in Egypt. And that's why until today, our brothers and other schools in Islam revere her shrine in Egypt. Likewise, there's a shrine for Imam al-Hussein salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alayhi. There's a shrine for the Imam you will find until today in Egypt, that people say the head of Imam al-Hussein was carried to the land of Egypt. Likewise, Nafisa, the great-granddaughter of Imam al-Hassan, is buried in Egypt. If you go to Egypt today, go to Cairo, ask them, where's the grave of Sayyida Nafisa? They'll tell you, I'll take you there and let's pray together to Allah that He answers our prayers through Sayyida Nafisa. Because we know Sayyida Nafisa was married to Ishaq al-Mutma'in, the son of Imam al-Sadiq. Imam al-Sadiq had a number of sons, Ismail, Abdullah, Musa ibn Ja'far, and he had a son by the name of Ishaq al-Mutma'in. Ishaq married Nafisa. They were living in Medina. After Medina, they moved to Palestine. From Palestine, they went to Egypt. She died in Egypt, and he wanted to bury her back in Medina. But in his dream, he saw Rasulullah telling him that I want my granddaughter Nafisa to be a blessing for the people of Egypt. And so he left a shrine for her in Egypt, and until today in Egypt, many of our brothers from the Shafi'i school of jurisprudence go and visit her shrine. Likewise, in the land of Iraq until today, you have a shrine for every different school of the religion of Islam. Go to the land of Baghdad until today. You'll find a shrine for a man by the name of Nu'man ibn Thabit, formerly known as Abu Hanifa. the head of the Hanafi school. His shrine is there. You'll find a shrine for Abdul Qadir al-Gailani or Abdul Qadir al-Jilani of the Sufi school. His shrine is there. You'll find a shrine for Imam Musa ibn Ja'far and Imam Muhammad al-Jawad. Their shrines are there. You'll find that each one of them has a beautiful shrine above their grave. Therefore, in one part of the Islamic world, there isn't a problem. A holy personality has a shrine on top of their grave and a mosque to honor that shrine. However, you go to a certain country in the Islamic world today, and when you go to visit that country, all you hear is the word innovator, innovator, grave worshipper, innovator. You're looking at him, you're thinking as in, what issue do you have with me coming to honor these personalities? No, this is shirk, this is polytheism. How dare you come and worship? What do you mean I'm worshiping? I'm not worshiping. And you find them producing book after book in their country, attacking the beliefs of Muslims, both Ja'fari Muslims and Shafi'i Muslims, because of their love for the family of the Prophet or for the companions. And that's why tonight's analysis, I'd like to dissect the issue. Is the honoring of a personality with a shrine and a mosque an innovation in Islam, or is it part of the tenets in Islam? And are we allowed to visit their shrines? And if we are, what is the basis of why we are visiting those shrines? And how should we address these people? Let's examine this and examine it in a number of stages. The first question that arises in this examination is what happened exactly to Ashab al-Kahf, or the companions of the cave? What do we mean? Because we know the companions of the cave were about 7 or 8 youths who lived in a turbulent period. The head of the state believed in himself as being a god, and he believed in being a god alongside other gods. These 7 or 8, what did they say? They came forward and they said very clearly that we do not believe in this man as a god. On the contrary, we are of the belief that there is only one God, and that Jesus, son of Mary, is the messenger of God. So they decided amongst themselves, what should they do? When the king found out that these 7 or 8 were pious believers in Allah, he knew that they also came from prestigious families. So he called them over. He said to them, listen, your families are aristocratic families. They are families who are from the upper echelons of society. I don't want to punish you straight away for not believing in what I follow. I'm going to give you a chance, and whatever you want, I'll offer you. All you need to do is leave this idea of an unseen God and worship me as one of the gods and follow me. The 7 or 8 knew that they only had a night or two to decide. So what did they do? After years of dissimulating their faith, after years of practicing taqiyya, they decided to leave that town, and they decided to run away from him and his ideology. Do you know, over 9 years, he sent 9 search parties looking for them? A 9-year period. He sent 9 search parties looking for them to find where they are. Why? Because he knew that when there are a group of youths who hold on to a principle, they can shake the whole of society. So therefore, within him, he thought, either I dumb down what these youths are doing, or they are going to change the mindset of my people, and they would be running away from him until eventually they settled in a cave. When they settled in a cave, naturally they were tired and they wanted to have some sleep within that cave, and with them was their dog. They were sleeping in the cave, and their dog was sleeping on the front entrance of the cave. When he had sent out the search parties, these search parties would come, they'd look through the cave. When they'd look, they'd see a dog in a position with his eyes wide open. Now, you're not going to exactly come and remove the dog when he's staring at you with those eyes looking at you in that way. So on many occasions, the people would think, well, if there's a dog at the entrance of the cave, we're, number one, not going to mess about with the dog, and number two, there's not going to be anyone behind him there, and you'd find that people would go away. Someone asked the question, then how did they remain alive in that cave? Because if they're not going out to eat food, and you're just asleep, how do you remain alive? Because there was an entrance for heat from the sun which would touch their body, which would mean there would be a movement of their body one way and the other, and therefore allowing for the blood flow to continue within the body. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plans, He plans in the most immaculate of ways, ensuring that these bodies were moving one way and the other. They slept, And it's ironic, when they woke up, they say something which we'll all say on the day we wake up. Which day? The day of judgment. When they woke up, one asked the other, how long have we been asleep for? And the reply was, a day or a part of a day. And notice that on the day of judgment, the Quran always mentions that each and every one of you, when you wake up on the day of judgment, if someone were to ask you, how long have you been asleep? You'll reply, a day or a part of a day. They looked at each other, they said, okay, if we've been asleep for a day or a part of a day, naturally we're hungry. They hadn't realized it was 309 years only they had been asleep. So naturally they were hungry. One of them said to the other, go out and bring us some food. Now you can imagine if I now went out in the year 2310, wearing the clothing that I wear in 2010, someone's going to look at me and say, is this person all right or no? As then they're going to look at me and say, you know, your mode of dress is at least 300 years backwards. He went out, he saw people staring at him and others laughing at him and others thinking this guy's woken up on the wrong side today. He went around trying to find some food until eventually he found somewhere, he was buying the food. Now your money is now an antique, isn't it? If you think about it, if I use the money today in 300 years time, someone's going to take my money, but then take it and invest in it, because they're going to say, I've got a coin or a note 300 years old. He looked at him, he said, excuse me, what's this note you're giving me? Or what's this coin? He said, what do you mean? He said, the coin is 300 years old. He looked at him and said, what do you mean 300 years old? He said, which era is this? He said, the era of Theodosius II. He said, this is not the era of Deiqanus. He said to him, no. When he realized, he knew that they had now been asleep for longer than a day or a part of a day. And you can imagine how it struck him. So what did he do? He went back all the way to the cave. When he went back to the cave, he entered. Suddenly the news began to go around. Do you remember that group of people? That group of 7, 8 youths who were loyal to the message of God, who the Prophet Jesus informed us about? Do you remember how nobody knew where they went? We have a feeling that we know where they are. So one search party went out, and then a second search party went out. The Quran indicates that these two search parties weren't on the same opinions as each other. In which way? In the idea that there was one search party which didn't really believe in their message, but just thought, let's actually go and see them. And the other search party, no. They were amongst the loyal believers in Allah and the message of Jesus, son of Mary. When they came, these Ashab al-Kahf, when they were informed that they had been asleep for this period, the narration states that they looked at each other and one of them said to the other, Ya Allah, in the same way that you have caused us to sleep for this many years, cause us to sleep that sleep which is longer. Meaning, allow us to pass away in this area. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, according to different narrations, allows them to pass away in the cave. But the Quran mentions an interesting line for all of you to take on board. What's that line? The Quran mentions the dispute that happened between the two search parties who came towards their cave. One search party came and said what? One search party said, قَالُوا ابْنُ عَلَيْهِمْ بُنْيَانًا. One search party said what? Erect over their cave an edifice. Now that God has caused them to die, erect an edifice, what we call in our language, a dharih. You know the dharih? Erect over them an edifice, because these are people who are a symbol. So erect an edifice over them. But the Quran says, قَالَ الَّذِينَ غَلَبُوا عَلَىٰ أَمْرِهِمْ لَنَتَّخِذَنَّ عَلَيْهِمْ مَسْجِدًا. Notice, the Quran says, but those who were victorious in the dispute said, no, not an edifice. We'll build a mosque over them. Masjid, of course, someone asks, well, there's no such thing as masjid in those days. If you're talking about Christianity, what's a masjid? A masjid as a center of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Notice Amir al-Mu'mineen one day walking with his companion saw a church. He said, I wonder how much shirk is being performed in that church. Imam Ali replied, I wonder how much Allah is being worshipped in that church. You notice the difference in the mentality? There are some of us, when we look at a non-Muslim, we say, kafir, disbeliever. There are some of us, when we look at a non-Muslim, we say, potential Muslim. A difference in the mentality. You find that the Quran said, قَالَ الَّذِينَ غَلَبُوا عَلَىٰ أَمْرِهِمْ لَنَتَّخِذَنَّ عَلَيْهِمْ مَسْجِدًا. The Quran made a statement that these holy personalities, Ashab al-Kahf, the Christians of their time, did not want to leave their message dead. No, because a person who stood up with a principle and who hoisted a banner of moral virtue isn't a person who you just give them a tombstone. It's someone you're proud of, aren't you? If your father died today, wouldn't you want something quite nice on top of his grave? Then how about those who stood for the religion of Islam? Therefore, the Quran came forward and didn't say that building a mosque over them is an innovation. No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set a precedent that Ashab al-Kahf, their people, built on top of their grave a mosque. Someone asked the question, but Ashab al-Kahf Sharia is one thing, our Sharia is another. As in their Sharia is years before the Sharia of Rasulullah. We have a principle within Islam which we state. If Rasulullah states that a Sharia previous to him is to be denied completely, then we don't choose that Sharia. However, if Rasulullah uses the Sharia as an example in his discussions, then we still apply that Sharia. And you find with the Holy Prophet on many occasions, he would use Ashab al-Kahf and the fact that a shrine and a mosque was built on top of them, he would use that principle in his discussions. Because what was the principle? The principle was, whenever I'm going to go and pray in that mosque, when I finish my salah, I'll see those who were the leaders in the way I uphold the principles of Allah on earth. Because when I know those personalities are buried there, automatically within me, I want to be like them. However, someone raised an objection. He said the Quran itself says, don't ever pray by the side of a grave. I say, what do you mean? Say in Surah 9, verse 84 of the Quran says, وَلَا تُصَلِّ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ مَاتَ أَبَدًا وَلَا تَقُمْ عَلَىٰ قَبْرِهِ. Say, Quran says, do not pray besides the grave of anyone who has died, and do not stand by that grave. So they came forward and they said that how could you bring about this particular objection when clearly the Quran is saying that you should never do such a thing? We reply, what's the context of this verse of the Quran? As in, when you bring me a verse of the Quran, don't just throw me a verse out of context. The context of this verse is Abdullah ibn Ubay, the chief of the hypocrites of Medina. Abdullah ibn Ubay, when he died, his son came to the Holy Prophet. And when he came to the Holy Prophet, said, Ya Rasulullah, do you mind if I take your shirt to make it as a kafan for my father? Rasulullah said, no problem. He said, Ya Rasulullah, do you mind praying for my father now that my father's passed away? Rasulullah replied, I do not mind, until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the verse to him. وَلَا تُصَلِّ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ مَاتَ أَبَدًا وَلَا تَقُمْ عَلَىٰ قَبْرِهِ. Why? إِنَّهُمْ كَفَرُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَمَاتُوا وَهُمْ فَاسِقُونَ. Now there's a condition. Do not stand by their grave, nor should you pray for them, because they disbelieved in Allah and they disbelieved in His Prophet and they died as open sinners. Do you notice the logical condition? The logical condition is, if there is a person who disbelieves in Allah and disbelieves in the Prophet and is an open sinner, I don't pray by his grave. What if there's a person who believes in Allah and believes in His Prophet? Logically speaking, if there's a grave of a person who believes in Allah and believes in His Prophet, by the laws of this verse, that means there is no problem standing by their grave. Someone replied again by saying, the Quran says in Surah 72 verse 18, وَأَنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ لِلَّهِ فَلَا تَدْعُ مَعَ اللَّهِ أَحَدًا. The Quran says the mosques are for Allah, so do not call to anyone besides Allah. They say, you people, when you go and visit your mosques of your holy personalities, we hear you saying, Ya Ali, Ya Hussein, Ya Musa ibn Ja'far, Ya Bab al-Hawaij. The Quran says, وَأَنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ لِلَّهِ فَلَا تَدْعُ مَعَ اللَّهِ أَحَدًا. We reply again, let's look at why this verse was revealed. This verse was revealed in relation when Habiba went to Africa. She said, I went in Africa and I found out that in the churches in Africa, where prophets of God were buried, originally their pictures used to be placed on top of their graves. The people would come, Assalamu alayka ya Nabi Allah, and they would walk away. Over time, instead of coming and simply doing what? Honoring the grave, some of the people came and started doing sujood to the grave. And so the Quran was coming forward and saying, Al-masajid lillah fala tad'u ma'allah ahada. That when you come towards a mosque, you don't come to do sujood to anyone but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even today within the school of Ahlul Bayt, within our own shrines in Karbala and Najaf, you'll find certain people coming forward in front of the grave, and they'll come and prostrate towards the person in the grave. Now, of course, someone will say, what's their niyyah? We know their niyyah isn't that they're worshipping the person. Their niyyah is a niyyah of reverence, but still, the image that it portrays. You can't simply turn around to everyone and say, do you know what, my niyyah, most people won't listen. The point is that the masajid were meant for whom? The sujood was meant for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And that's why we noticed in the behavior of our Prophet, there was a period when our Prophet forbade the visiting of the graves. In Mecca, there is a hadith where Rasulullah forbids the visiting of the grave. Why? Is it because Rasulullah thought it's haram for us to go to the qabristan and visit the graves? Is it haram for us to stand by a grave? No. It's because the only reason people were going to visit the graves was to show off who has more family members in that qabristan. It happens until today, don't worry. You'll go and visit the qabristan, for example, on a Sunday. You know, my auntie is there, my uncle's there, 15 of my dads are there, 27 moms are there. And you're looking at the person, you're like, who cares? And well done, mashallah. You have that many family members. Credit to all of them. Let's recite a Surah Al-Fatiha for all of them. You look at the person, you find some, when they go to a graveyard, their intentions are purely worldly. Rasulullah's hadith, which we hear quoted whenever we go in Umrah, that Rasulullah said, I forbid the visiting of the graves. Why? Because Abd Manaf and Banu Qais, one day they went towards the graveyards. Banu Qais said, do you know how many people I've got buried in my graveyard? Said, how many? Said, I've got 17 people in the graveyard. Banu Abd Manaf replied, doesn't matter, we've got 21. Banu Qais said, we don't care, I think we have 27. They started an argument. The Quran revealed the verse, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhaakum at-takathur hatta zurtumul maqabir. The Quran revealed the verse very clearly by saying, your numbers have deceived you when you visited the graveyards. Meaning what? Meaning that when Rasulullah forbid the visiting of the graves, the context of forbidding the visiting of the graves according to Rasulullah wasn't that visiting the graves is haram. No, that if your intention when you're visiting a grave is to simply show off how many family members you have within that graveyard, then that's not what we want from you. And that's why when Rasulullah went to Medina, he said, originally I had forbidden the visiting of the graves, now I enjoin you to visit the graves. Why? Please listen, brothers and sisters. Why? Because of two reasons. Number one, visitation of the grave purifies the heart of the human being, without a shadow of doubt. Because we know that this heart can become an extremely arrogant heart, can't it? The heart of the human can become an arrogant heart. The human walks on the earth thinking they know everything, thinking they'll live forever. All they need to do is go to a graveyard. When they go to a graveyard, that heart suddenly softens. Why? Because as one famous person said, the only certainty in life is death. Isn't that true or no? The only certainty in life is death. And hence the second reason Rasulullah said, purifies your heart, and it reminds you of Allah and reminds you of the Day of Judgment. Bahlul tells Harun al-Rashid, he says to him, I want the keys to the prisons of Baghdad. Harun al-Rashid said, what do you want to do with them? He said, just give them to me, I just want to take them. He said, Bahlul, don't do anything stupid. You're going to take them, bring the keys back to me, please, and don't do anything. He said, no, don't worry, don't worry. I'll take the keys and I'll see what I'll do. Bahlul gets on the broomstick and starts running. He gets the soldiers coming into Harun al-Rashid's palace. When they come in, we got a problem, master. He says, what's the problem? He says, the problem is all of the prisoners of Baghdad's prisons have been released. He said, what do you mean they've been released? How did they get released? They said, we don't know. Someone had the keys and he's opened all the doors and everyone's out. Can you imagine the chaos that would cause if today someone opened all of the prison system for everybody to come in the streets of Vancouver? You find that he had opened, so Harun Rashid said, bring me Bahlul. Where's Bahlul? They brought Bahlul. He looked at Bahlul and said, Bahlul, what have you done? The narration states, one narration states what? States that he had asked, where is Bahlul? They said, Bahlul's in the graveyard. So the narration states that Harun al-Rashid went to the graveyard. He said, he saw Bahlul. He said, Bahlul, what have you done? He said, I'm sorry. And he started crying and crying and crying. Harun al-Rashid said, very well, I'll find a way of forgiving you. Bahlul said, how will you forgive me? He said, if you can get all the prisoners back, then I'll forgive you. He said, very well, let's stay here in the graveyard, because there'll be a day when they'll all come back here. Isn't that true? As in, there'll be a day when all of them will come to this graveyard. The reality is that every human being, one day, where will they end up? In the graveyard. That's why Bahlul sat with Harun al-Rashid one day in the graveyard, and Harun al-Rashid sees him playing with skulls, and he bounces one skull and the other, and then he draws a line, and he draws another line. Harun al-Rashid said, Bahlul, what are you doing? Please explain to me. He said, well, with the skulls, there is one skull in one hand, another skull in the other. But I don't know which one belongs to a king, which belongs to a pauper. When we die, it's one skull, isn't it? You can't tell who's the king, you can't tell who's the pauper. It's that same skull that sits in front of you. He said, so why are you drawing the line on the ground? He said 6 feet under for Harun al-Rashid, and there'll be 6 feet under for Bahlul as well. Meaning that each one of us, at the end of the day, whatever money we've earned on this earth, whatever degrees we've earned on this earth, at the end of the day, we go back towards where? Go back to the earth that we came from. Rasulullah, when he went to Medina, what did he say? He said, I used to forbid you from visiting the graves in Mecca, but now I enjoin you to visit the graves. For it purifies your heart, reminds you of Allah, and reminds you of the Day of Judgment. And that's why when you look at the legacy of Rasulullah on a number of occasions with his own companions, he would highlight to us the importance of the respect to the people of the graves. He would highlight to us that these people who have died, don't think they are dead. No, they are receiving sustenance from their Lord. And those of our enemies who are dead, don't think they are dead. No, they can hear us better than you can hear me. In which way? In the Battle of Badr, after the Battle of Badr, Rasulullah was seen walking away. He went towards a group of wells. You know, in Badr there were wells of water. He started talking towards the dead bodies of the opposition at Badr. Have you found what Allah has promised you to be true? One of his companions came to him and said to me, Ya Rasulullah, the people are dead. How can they hear us? He said, they can hear me better than you can hear me. Meaning what? Meaning that you think their bodies are dead, but their souls are still alive. And it means that even though that they are bad, they can still hear my words towards them. After the Battle of Uhud, Rasulullah, what did he do? Many of the wives or the widows of those who had lost husbands at Uhud were complaining that our husbands, did they die in vain? Have they died in a good cause? Maybe their lives weren't worth it? Rasulullah said, no, on the contrary. Those martyrs at Uhud, وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءً. Do not count those who have died in the way of Allah as being dead. No. Rather, they are alive, receiving sustenance from their Lord. The point being what? The point being that Rasulullah was making it clear that when a person you see his body is dead, it doesn't mean his soul is dead. No, his soul can still hear. And that's why we say in the ziyarah that we are certain that you hear our words and that you reply to our salam. That's our line in ziyarah, isn't it? That we are certain when we stand in front of the shrine of a member of the family of Rasulullah or of the companions of Rasulullah, we say that we are certain that you hear our words and you reply back to our salam. Why? Because we know that although there's a shrine covering you, and although there's a mosque on top of that shrine, we know very well that you can hear us because your bodies are dead, but your souls remain alive. And that's why you find with the Holy Prophet, he himself makes clear that if anyone comes and tells you that Muhammad is dead, know that the spirit of Muhammad remains alive. Because you know, in that particular country, until today, the head of the country will say, my walking stick is of more use than Muhammad in his grave. I said to him, what do you mean? He said, Muhammad's dead. Well, what's the point of coming near him? 26 years he's opposite Rasulullah's grave, he doesn't go and visit him. 26 years. He says, my walking stick is of more value than Muhammad's dead body. Whereas we know very well that on top of his grave, there is a line which indicates that the man buried in the shrine, His body may have now died, but his soul remains alive. And ironically, the verse says, وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ الظَّلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ جَاءُوكَ فَاسْتَغْفَرُوا اللَّهَ وَاسْتَغْفَرَ لَهُمُ الرَّسُولُ لَوَجَدُوا اللَّهَ تَوَّابًا رَحِيمًا. If after the people have been unjust to themselves, they come to you, O Rasulullah, and ask for forgiveness, Allah will forgive them on your behalf. Someone will ask, yes, this is in the lifetime of Rasulullah, but not after he's died. No. Ask our brothers in other schools in Islam 3 days after Rasulullah died. That companion who came to his grave and said to him, Ya Rasulullah, in front of the grave he stood. He said, Ya Rasulullah, you told us to pray, we prayed. You told us to fast, we fasted. You told us to go on Hajj, we went on Hajj. You told us the verse, وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ اِظَّلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ جَاءُوكَ فَاسْتَغْفَرُوا اللَّهَ وَاسْتَغْفَرَ لَهُمُ الرَّسُولُ لَوَجَدُوا اللَّهَ تَوَّابًا رَحِيمًا. That those who come to you after they've been unjust to themselves, if they ask for forgiveness from Muhammad, Allah will forgive them on behalf of His Prophet. Ya Rasulullah, I come to you asking you to pray to Allah to forgive me. He heard a voice coming back from the grave, oh man, you have been forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala. And that's why no greater message of honoring the graves of a human being can be seen like when Rasulullah built Jannat al-Baqi'. Because that Jannat al-Baqi' that we have is our most treasured garden, our treasured possession. I tell you, it should be the responsibility of every member of the school of Ahlul Bayt to make it a point in their lifetime not only to visit Jannat al-Baqi', no, that one day in their lifetime they'll recapture Jannat al-Baqi' from the tyrant oppressors who stand around Jannat al-Baqi'. All those tyrant oppressors who stand in that country around Jannat al-Baqi', desecrating the shrines of the family of Rasulullah, desecrating the relics of the religion of Islam. You think when I speak about Jannat al-Baqi', I'm speaking about a historical masterpiece? That's all I do is 4 steps up on a minbar, I speak to you about a piece of land somewhere in Saudi Arabia. It's in my vein and my blood that there'll be a day where we sacrifice our lives for Jannat al-Baqi' to be back in our hands, and for us to speak out against that tyrannical government and that tyrannical oppressive group of scholars who sits around that area. How many more diplomatic ties do our countries build with that area with no change to the land of Baqi'? Diplomatic ties, one after another. The first thing you should ask for is for the Baqi' cemetery to be rebuilt, because that cemetery Rasulullah wanted to keep the history of the religion alive. That cemetery, originally known as Baqi' al-Gharqad. Al-Gharqad is the Lyceum Shawi tree. The Lyceum Shawi were a group of trees that used to grow in Medina. It was a group, a big piece of land with a group of trees. When it was purchased by the Holy Prophet ordered that the trees are removed in order that people are buried within that piece of land. The first of the Muhajirun to be buried in that land was a man by the name of Uthman ibn Mad'un. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen had 4 sons from al-Banin. Abu Fadl al-Abbas, number 1. And he had a son by the name of Ja'far, and a son by the name of Abdullah, and a son by the name of Uthman. People ask, this Uthman is the son of Ali ibn Abi Talib. How could Ali ibn Abi Talib name his son Uthman? Because considering there may be a difference of opinion, he said, I named him after Uthman ibn Mad'un. Uthman ibn Mad'un was one of the few men in the days of Jahiliyyah who never drank alcohol while others drank around him. And he was one of the purest men. Uthman ibn Mad'un was the first of the Muhajirun to be buried in Jannat al-Baqi'. In the Ansar, the first of the Ansar, As'ad ibn Zurara, was the first of the Ansar to be buried in Jannat al-Baqi'. Of the woman, Ruqayya, the stepdaughter of Rasulullah. You know, Rasulullah had a number of stepdaughters. From Khadija's sister Hala, her daughters, Ruqayya was the first to be buried there. Rasulullah, Aisha herself would say, at the end of the night, when he'd leave the house, I'd see him leaving, I'd follow him. I'd wonder, where is he going? I'd see that he goes to the land of Baqi', and he'd say, oh Allah, have mercy on those who are buried in Jannat al-Baqi'. Oh Allah, have mercy and forgive the people of Jannat al-Baqi'. Why? Because Rasulullah was teaching us that these people, their bodies may have died, but their messages, you must keep them alive. And your ziyarah to their graves keeps them alive. When we stand in front of their graves, do we say we are worshipping them? Or do we say, أشهد أنكم أقمتم الصلاة وآتيتم الزكاة وأمرتم بالمعروف ونهيتم عن المنكر وأطعتم الله ورسوله حتى آتاكم اليقين. Notice our words. What part of our ziyarah is a part of shirk? Don't we come forward and we say, we swear that you enjoin the good, you forbid the evil, you establish salah, you establish paying of the poor rate, and you obeyed Allah and His Prophet until death reached you. And that's why when you look at those who are buried in Jannat al-Baqi', not just for the school of Ahlul Bayt, for every school in Islam, each one of them, when we stand by their grave, why do we stand? We stand because within each one of them there is a principle which we can use for our own life. When I stand by the grave of an imam, I don't stand simply because I am honoring someone in my history. I stand by the grave of an imam because I learned from that imam's life. Imam Malik ibn Anas of the Maliki school of fiqh. Our brothers in Morocco, Algeria and Tunisia. Our brothers who follow the Maliki school in that part of North Africa. Imam Malik ibn Anas is buried in Jannat al-Baqi'. Imam Malik ibn Anas, if I stand by his grave in Jannat al-Baqi', I stand by to worship Malik ibn Anas? Or I stand by his grave because of what? I stand because I learned from a man who left behind a book by the name of the Muwatta. The Muwatta is with us until today, a legal text which is used in the Maliki school. I learned that this man used his pen to defend the religion of Islam. This was a man who was from the students of Imam al-Sadiq. So when I stand by his grave, even though he may be from another school in Islam, I'm honoring a scholar of the scholars of the history of the religion of Islam. Who else is buried in Jannat al-Baqi'? Fatima bint Asad, the mother of Amir al-Mu'mineen, is buried in Jannat al-Baqi'. When I stand by her grave, do I stand to worship Fatima bint Asad? Or do I stand to honor a lady because I'm honoring her sacrifice for the message of Islam? That Rasulullah buried Fatima bint Asad with his own hands, and he shrouded her with his own shroud in order to show what this lady had sacrificed. I stand by her grave so that I worship, or that I take the message of sacrifice. Who else is buried there? Abdullah ibn Ja'far, the husband of Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam. Abdullah ibn Ja'far is buried in Jannat al-Baqi'. Abdullah ibn Ja'far, Imam used to say, there is no one as generous as Abdullah ibn Ja'far. He is the most generous of all the members of those who married women from Al Muhammad. He used to give away from himself. If I stand by his grave, am I worshipping him, or am I learning the meaning of generosity from Abdullah bin Ja'far? Who else is buried in Jannat al-Baqi'? al-Baneen. And if ever I want to learn about loyalty to the message of Ahlul Bayt, is there a better lady I can learn from? Here, when I stand by al-Baneen's grave, I learn from a lady who gave 4 sons to the message of the religion of Islam. A lady who said, I swear, if you give me the whole heavens and the earth, and you gave me 70 Abbas, I'll swap all of them to see Hussein's head in peace. When I stand by her grave, what am I doing? I'm learning from a principle of someone who gave their life away. Who else is buried in Jannat al-Baqi'? Abbas, the uncle of Rasulullah, Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib. Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, who Rasulullah used to say, when it comes to Salat al-Rahim, nobody is like my uncle Abbas. My uncle Abbas is the greatest in observing relations with his family members. When I stand by his grave, am I worshipping him or learning from his principle? Who else is buried? Imam al-Hasan is buried in Jannat al-Baqi'. I stand by the very height of generosity in Al Muhammad. Imam al-Baqir is buried in Jannat al-Baqi'. I stand by the man of knowledge of Ahlul Bayt. Imam al-Sadiq is buried in Jannat al-Baqi'. I stand by the meaning of the truthful one of Ahlul Bayt. In none of them, when I stand by their graves, do I have an intention of worshipping them. Never. Never do you find anyone in the school of Ahlul Bayt who stands in Jannat al-Baqi' with the intention of worshipping a grave. Rather, we come and send our salutations towards those great personalities and the way they should have been honored. And you know what the irony of the history of Islam is? That sometimes the greatest members in this religion aren't honored in the way they should be with their graves. In the idea that you find Amir al-Mu'mineen, when we buried him, nobody knew about where his grave is for years. Why? Because the religion of Islam reached the stage where if they found out where Ali ibn Abi Talib is buried, the Khawarij would have taken his body out of the grave and burnt him. You find Fatima al-Zahra, Imam dug 7 graves on the night he buried Fatima al-Zahra. How many? 7. Why? Because he wanted to make sure that they don't exhume the body of Fatima from the grave. Tuesday, I will explain to you step by step what happened with the incident of the door. And I'll show you the line where the man came to Imam and said, you didn't allow us to be at her funeral, I'll exhume her body to find out where she is. So the Imam had personally dug 7 graves so that they wouldn't know which one is Fatima's, because of the amount of hatred that there was for Fatima al-Zahra. And that's why you find that some of the greatest of personalities, their graves weren't honored in the way they should be. And until today we ask ourselves, where is the grave of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam? Where is the grave of the flower of Rasulullah? We walk between Baqi' and between the grave of Rasulullah, wondering in which area is the grave of Fatima. And that's why nowhere better to begin the recital of the Masa'ib of Al-Muhammad than by beginning with the burial of the mother of Fatima al-Zahra. Because no lady in the religion of Islam had given as much away to the message of Rasulullah like her mother Khadija. And that's why in the same way Fatima had to be buried secretly, same way Imam Ali had to be buried secretly, Khadija was buried. But Rasulullah, when he came to burying her, the kafan that he placed on her body, because of the poverty that had faced him, the kafan that he placed on her body wasn't even long enough to cover her body. Imagine a lady whose wealth built the religion of Islam. You would reach the level at the end of her life where you can't even place a kafan long enough for her body. The narration state that Rasulullah, when he came, he placed the kafan on her body, and the kafan would only go halfway across the body. This hurt Rasulullah. He turned towards Allah. He said, Ya Allah, I am your prophet Muhammad, and this is Khadija, whose wealth built the religion of Islam. Ya Allah, watch me now when I want to place a kafan over her body. Because any human being, when they die, they deserve a kafan over their body. A human being should never be left alone on the ground without a kafan covering their body. All of you know where I will head now as I go towards this musibah. When he said, Ya Allah, provide me with a kafan, the narration states the angel Jibreel came to him. He said to him, Ya Rasulullah, here are 5 kafans from your Lord. He looked at him and he said to him, Jibreel, tell me who the first kafan is for. He said to him, Ya Rasulullah, the first kafan is for your wife Khadija, in order that you are able to bury her body. He said to him, Jibreel, tell me who the second kafan is for. He said to him, Ya Rasulullah, the second kafan is for you, in order that when you die there is someone to cover your body. He said to him, Jibreel, tell me who the third kafan is for. He said to him, Ya Rasulullah, the third kafan is for your daughter Fatima al-Zahra, in order that when she dies there is a kafan to cover her body. He said to him, Ya Rasulullah, tell me who the fourth kafan is for. He said to him, Ya Jibreel, the fourth kafan is for Ali ibn Abi Talib, in order that when he dies there is a kafan to cover his body. He said to him, Jibreel, tell me who the fifth kafan is for. He said to him, Ya Rasulullah, the fifth kafan is for your grandson Hassan, in order that when he dies there is a kafan to cover his body. He called out to him, Jibreel, tell me where is the kafan for Abu Abdullah? What will happen to Abu Abdullah and his kafan? He replied to him, Ya Rasulullah, Abu Abdullah will die without a kafan covering his body. He said to him, why? He said, because the horses of Bani Umayyah will trample on the body of Abu Abdullah, removing any kafan that lay on his body. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Raise your hands, brothers and sisters. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to raise up.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين